Okay, so we are here in the aftermath of the video we posted recently, the two-part video on a life-affirming alternative to self-negating non-duality, where you very eloquently articulated a lot of your emergent philosophy of unividualism, as you call it, that as an ontology that affirms both our real personal individuality and our oneness of being. And as you beautifully say, this experience can lead to something that you call unividuality or being unividual, so that we're not negated by our experience of oneness, but we experience our unity as individuals. And this is a particularly exciting time because you have something coming out soon called a pod book. Maybe you could share what it's called and say a little bit about that to help people know where they can go to find it and what to look forward to.
Yeah. So the things that we discussed in a conversational way, and like the questions that have come up that we'll address in this video, are great. But what I really have been working on is a organized exposition in a lot of detail. And because I've written so many books, I want to do it differently. So I'm doing it as what I'm calling a pod book, which is a kind of experiment, which I hope is going to work, which is a love child of a podcast and a book. So it's got the organization of a book. It'll be chapters, this idea, now get this idea, now get this idea, and build an understanding like I would in a book, but done like this, done in a conversational manner. I'll just speak it, I'll just say it, and I'm hoping that can capture the clarity of the book with that personal connection you get from watching video. And it also means that I can just give it away on YouTube. And so anyone who's watching this wants to make sure they hear that. It will be coming in early 2025, I hope. That's the intention. It's happening. So they subscribe to my newsletter on my website, or, well, to either of our channels, then I'm sure they'll get to hear about it when it arrives and they can see what they think. Because it's if you can get the organizational level really clear, I think it really helps see what it is that I've been exploring and what we've been exploring together.
Amazing. And I will definitely do what I can to update people on it when it comes out. So
Brilliant.
looking forward to that. So we said that we would do a Q&A. So we invited people who watched those two videos to post questions in the comments. And so we've now gone through and gathered a few really juicy ones that I think would be constructive. And some of them I think are maybe common questions. So it could be really great, to answer those for other folks who have them. And I do want to say, I think I'm going to start saying this in general now, that this is an ultimate truth-free zone. So just before people might come to the assumption that, okay, there's two more talking heads here to claim a new ultimate absolute truth that's undeniable, that this is not that, and that we are inviting people to explore, if they feel called to, a potentially more compelling worldview contrasted with a lot of the Eastern self-negating stuff. And take what resonates and leave what doesn't. But I think, as will come out probably in one of the questions, your kind of view that sort of deconstructs and presents an alternative to ultimate truth is likely to come up. So had to get that plug out there for.
I like that. I think that's a good free zone to be in.
Oh, great. I'm glad we're there together. So, okay, I'm going to pull up our document, and they're all really good. So I think I'll just randomly throw them at you and see what works.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this one I think is I mean, it's pretty commonly asked, but we get the response, which wouldn't necessarily just be to unividualism, but that says, okay, this is just a belief system. Just stop. Reality can't be understood. Why even try? And somebody wrote, I've experienced oneness, and the experience reaches far beyond description. And other people who have experienced that feel the same way. So there's a knowing that reaches far beyond words and ideas. Anything else is like trying to grasp mist with your hand. And again, says we can attempt to describe the ineffable that are derived from categorization, but they fail to fully describe it. So would love to put that out there, because I think that that's probably a good one to start with before we're exploring more of the philosophy.
I love the image that whoever's put that in as grasping mist with your hand. It's a really beautiful, poetic image. And I completely get it. So most of my life has been spent exploring that experience. And I've written many, many books which start with, wow, this is a mystery. I mean, nearly all of my books start with it. I think whenever I give a public presentation, I always start with, what the hell? And, it stops and ends there. The mystery is the impetus for the search, and it's also where you end up. But this idea that somehow there's areas of life which are just out of bounds to understanding, or even the whole of it. First, let's do the whole of it. The idea that the whole of it cannot be understood is nonsense, because we wouldn't be able to talk on the internet like this if people took that attitude. It's only
Were you saying that because I think that confuses me for a second.
Okay.
Do you mean to say that of course we can't understand the whole, but we can understand parts of it?
Oh, well, no, what I said wasn't very eloquent, so I'm glad you picked me up on it. So what I was trying to say is the idea we should give up on understanding
Okay.
is just nuts, because our understanding has moved on incredibly. The idea that you can never capture something in words is not just true of the mystical, it's true of everything. And
Right.
I think we may have even talked about this. I mean, the example for me is the famous story about the mango is the one I think we mentioned. I can't remember what we did and didn't talk about, but let's take chocolate. That's a nice one. Everyone knows if you've never tasted anything sweet, it would be impossible to get across what chocolate's like. So, but if you had, you could go, oh yeah, it's this really nice chocolate, and you'd know what it was. Same with the oneness. When I talk to people, and I obviously know a lot of people who have experienced this, we can talk about it because we both know what we're referring to. Have you captured it in words? No, but you can't capture anything in words. Nothing. Like words allow you to communicate about experience. So if there's shared experience, you can talk about it. If there's not shared experience, it's really, really, really hard. You have to try and find ways. And as somebody who's spent certainly the last 30 years introducing people to this experience, which they've never had before, I've really worked hard to find ways to guide people into a place where they suddenly get it.
Right.
And you can do that with words. Words are a way in which we share things. So I have sympathy with this question, but it feels also that it's missing something. And it's missing that even knowing what that experience is requires us to ideate, which is why one of the things which I guess has been an advantage for me is that I have written and studied experientially and philosophically all these different spiritual traditions. And what I notice is that there's underlying human experiences like oneness, for example, but that different traditions talk about it in different ways. And that colors what they experience. So for some, it's a devotional experience. For others, it's really not. So it's not like there's the experience is just given. There's ideation involved in that experience. So being able to question how you interpret the experience it feels like really important. And the idea that you should just dismiss it, or that there's something special about spirituality. I mean, talk to people who study quantum physics. That's the opposite end in the evolutionary scale, I think, to spirituality. That's like the really foundational. It's really hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Anything which is not every day is hard to talk about and requires effort and requires you have to find ways. And I would much prefer to go for that, but with the qualification of what you started with. You're never going to nail it with a word. That's a misunderstanding of what words are.
Right.
Words enable you to move your ideation around. That's what they're designed for. And to communicate like we're doing now, which is fantastic. So there's something dismissive. I'm not saying this person was being dismissive, but what I come across a lot is that kind of like, no, and what it does is it leaves somebody with their own understanding unreflectively. They think they've got nothing, but they are ideating like mad. They just can't see it. And and that criticism is aimed at younger me, because that's what I did. Yeah. So once you've seen that, oh no, it's really good to reflect on all these things. It's not a waste of time. And whilst you'll never arrive at some ultimate anything, you does improve your understanding, and that changes your experience, which also improves.
Yeah, well said. And I think, the whole, not the whole point, but coming from my perspective, when we did those two conversations, I was focusing a lot on how these different views that you're sharing have really been powerful for a lot of people who feel kind of stuck in the self-negating, non-dual ultimate truth worldview that, okay, now I've seen that the self doesn't exist. That's completely undeniable. Everything is pure awareness. And for whatever reason, sometimes this can be really harmful to people's lives, or they simply find it becomes limiting or it's not serving them in a positive direction. And they want to move on to a different view, but feel very stuck in that whole, well, it's non-conceptual and I know it and I've experienced it. So nothing else can, even touch that. But I think that when I went through that whole kind of world of the more kind of popular negation non-duality, was thinking that I had no concepts anymore, or thinking that this was all just the direct experience of everything with I have no belief system, no ideology. And then later to pick that apart and say, well, just a statement, everything is pure consciousness, is a very kind of sophisticated idea. And so these are the sorts of things that you kind of helped me to start to recognize so that I could at least see what it was that I was in and what was going on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that what I notice, and this is again directed at an old me as much as anyone else, is that what happens often is, I mean, I want to go to someone who says, I experience oneness, and go, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Because it could mean a lot of things. Is it, what does that mean? When you say it's all awareness, what does the word awareness signify there? And if you
Yeah.
can't answer those questions, you're not saying anything. All you're saying is, I had an experience. That's all you're
Right.
saying. And I liked it, perhaps,
Yeah.
or the other one, which I've only really got into over the last period of my life, is going, how did you have that experience? Because I'm having the experience of looking around the room with my eyes, and I'm interpreting it through my neurological system, blah, blah, blah. There's the psyche. When you experience that oneness, you couldn't do it with your senses. How did you experience? And these seem like really important questions which just don't get asked. And dismissing them it's just going, oh, I don't want to think about it. That's what it's
Right.
really saying. I
Mhm.
leave it. I just, it just, now that's okay. People want to do that. That's up to them. But I would like them at least to give the dignity to two people who are taking a different attitude. To the person who's going, "No, well, that's not good enough for me. I want to be able to ask those questions and push my understanding." And for people to have the respect to go, oh, okay, you're interested in that, great. But
Right.
also, and this is tricky, to allow the other people who may be going, well, I just know that God wants me to do this, or whatever it is, Scientology is the way, or whatever the thing is, or my guru is great, or I should go and commit these horrendous crimes, what to me are crimes because it's divinely. That's also somebody just going, don't think about it. Why is that wrong if it's okay for you to go, don't think about it? And
Mhm.
and I so you either have to go, well, I'm just off on my own little thing and it's got no relationship to anyone else. Or you have to be able to go, we have to weigh these different options and try and understand them and interact with each other and seek the truth together, where the truth means the most trustworthy way of understanding this we can find right now between us. And then it becomes less of a, I'm off on my own little thing. It becomes something we can share, and we may disagree, but that's okay. We can still share it and work together to find a deeper understanding. And that's what's been happening in the scientific arena, which is why we have the internet, and it hasn't been happening in the spiritual arena, which is why it's still stuck in the ancient world often. It's still stuck in a pre-scientific form
Mhm.
because it hasn't done that. It has not reflected on itself. And one of the big reasons it's so terribly stuck is when people go, you can't even think about it. Don't think about it. It's just a mystery. Who knows?
Mhm.
Whereas the both and approach for me is, it is a mystery. Never lose that. And then do your best to understand it.
Right.
And then keep coming back to, wow, it's a mystery. And then do your best to understand it. And those two can fit together perfectly.
I'm with you, and that's been super helpful for me, especially was to be able to say, and I know this is what you're saying too, is that all of this is really about what you conclude from these experiences and what your interpretations are, and being able to say that all of these, spiritual experiences are real and they're profound and they can be positive. They can also be wildly negative, but that you're not negating or invalidating any of those experiences. For example, of I am pure consciousness, but you're reinterpreting it to, okay, there was an experience that happened there, but perhaps what didn't happen was that you didn't just become your true self of pure consciousness. So people are not really seeing that, well, you're putting forth a very specific interpretation, even if you don't feel like you're clinging to that. And for me, I think there's so much immense positive value in considering how those interpretations affect us as humans. How do they affect society? How do they make people act? Are people who are experiencing reality this way and putting forth that interpretation, is it making people kinder? Is it making them actually more interconnected? Or, what? Because I've seen a lot of the harmful effects and qualities that this can lead to. So back to what we're doing here, which is looking at some potentially more compelling and humanistic ways to interpret these mysterious experiences.
Beautifully put. Yeah, I resonate with all of that, Jessica. The thought that's coming to me, and I'm always looking for ways to just get it across so that people who are sitting on the fence, because it's a very common attitude, and I do, I get it, which goes, oh, it's a mystery, and it's to feel the mystery is such a lovely thing. I mean, I really recommend it. But I'm always looking to find us an example which people wouldn't do, and then them to be able to go, well, isn't that the same? So that the example that's coming up, I'm going to try it and see if it works. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't. We'll find out. But I want to go, look, if you went back in time to your ancestors, not, around the time that a lot of spirituality was being, the books were being written, and you went, and you heard the thunder, and your ancestors said to you, oh, that's a god with a big mallet in the sky hitting a big anvil. That's what that is. And you went, I don't think it is. I think it might be electromagnetism, which wouldn't make any sense to them, but you could say it. The two things with that, I think, is that if they then went, well, it's a god, what more can you say? It's a mystery. No one understands the gods. Mm-hmm. It's like, you'd like, oh, yeah, okay, but we can actually understand this. And it's actually something else. And it's a bit like that with all of these things. Only if you stop and you can find a better understanding, which makes the old one look not as good. But the thunder is still the thunder. They hear it, you hear it. They heard it then, you heard it now. Same with the experience of awakening, let's just call it. That people have these experiences, oneness, overwhelming love, benevolence, all those things. That you can trace that back. I've done it right through history. Yeah. It changes. It's not the same, but it's a thread. But that doesn't mean that we can't also keep understanding it better, like we have with everything else.
Right. In new ways and exploring how that changes
exactly right. And it changes the experience. You understand it in new, better ways. And this is another very important human experience, which we can do that with.
Yeah. And also strikes me as something that I, came to realize in my experience was like all of these different interpretations and scientific explanations, they don't take away the mystery. It's adding in some way. I mean, electromagnetism, what is that? That itself is also a mystery.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Understand, but it doesn't take away the mystery. It can still be a mystery and having some ways to describe it or interpret it. So, all right, excellent. Let's see what we have next.
Oh, it's like Christmas already. It's Chris. We're recording this just before Christmas, and it feels like
exactly
these little
wrap up each little block.
And in this one, we've got.
Well, so I'm actually going to put out two, and you'll pick which one you prefer.
Oh, well, choose one, or we'll do both.
Okay. Okay. So here we go. I'm trying to pick out maybe some of the more slightly controversial ones as well, but I think one. The Grinch. I'm just kidding. So, do you have The Grinch in the UK?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, of course, Dr. Seuss. Okay, so this one, what about beauty, truth, and the good being foundational truth? Because
okay.
Go ahead.
So, well, that's a reference back to Plato, although Plato never actually said that, it is viewed as Plato, that there's some absolutes, that's absolute truth. Well, you talked about that already and went, look, this is an absolute truth-free zone. So then there's the idea that somehow absolute truth and absolute beauty and absolute goodness, the good, are all the same thing, or all linked in some way. I think this is wrong. I think it's a lovely idea, but it's wrong, and it's a pre-evolutionary understanding of these things. So there's beauty, but there's no essence. There's no pure beauty, absolute beauty, and there's no absolute truth. There's no absolute anything. And we can understand these things in a different way, which is going, well, truth is about whether we can or can't trust our understanding. The word truth, as I'm sure I said in our conversation, its etymology is being trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And so if we say something which is true, you want to be able to believe it. If I go, you walk down my road, you'll find my shop on the corner, and that's true, and you walk down and there it is, that's better than if you walk down and found it wasn't true, it was not there at all. And that's what we're looking for, and that evolves like everything. So we have much more understanding, truthful understanding now than at any other time in history by a long, long way. And then beauty, I think, is an evolutionary aspect of the fact that in biology we have a basic yuck and yum reaction. Where we instantly, you can get it immediately. You eat, or you smell it, and that's going to develop and evolve into these very much more ideational forms of beauty. And then, one of the things I love is how things which were previously ugly become beautiful. You see that in music all the time, which, I'm a great lover of seventh chords in jazz, and what I love is that today we hear them and they go, oh, that's so nice. But for nearly the whole of history, they were a discord. So it changes ideationally what beauty is, and modern art and all the rest of it. And then with goodness, I think it's very clearly what we think is good is defined by the story we're telling about the nature of reality. So in previous cultures, it was good if you were a warrior and went out and took out your enemy and stole from them and, brought home some slaves. Hey, you're good. That's good. Now that would be horrendous. We don't like that. And I'm glad we don't. It's like we've moved on. So all of these things I think are evolutionary. And then we reify them. We take something which is a relationship of yuck and yum, say, and then we turn it into a thing. There's a thing called beauty, capital B, but there isn't. That's making a thing out of something which is not a thing. Really, there's these evolving relationships that we have with the universe, and they're beautiful, and they lead to greater truth.
You'd be okay with calling beauty more of an experience rather than per se.
Yeah. Well, I think all of these things are relational. There's no, I guess, there in the common sense way, there is beauty because you experience something as beautiful, and you could say there's beauty in the world. Lovely. But not this absolute thing. Plato's idea was that there were these absolutes, and everything that's beautiful shared in some way was a slightly corrupted form of pure beauty. And
right.
And I think that's a whole discussion about what Plato meant, how we should understand that. It's an interesting discussion, but probably not the one for today. All I would say to this is, I think we've moved on from that understanding, and we can understand it in an evolutionary sense. It makes a lot more sense.
Okay. And so where I was thinking when I read that was, you're putting forth something pretty, maybe we could say like topsy-turvy, where you're saying, you said it really beautifully, that the universe may be flowering into God, rather where you talk about this universal benevolence being part of this emergent experience you're calling God. But so many people in a lot of the non-dual traditions as well think of that as being primary. So that benevolence, that beauty, that truth, the goodness is all there at the beginning and what everything really is and always has been. But you're describing that as potentially qualities of God, but your perspective on God has changed quite a bit. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, because we did go into that in the video. But
yeah, well, let's certainly touch on it because it's so important what you've just said. to me, the idea, it's just incoherent now. Although I had the view most of my life, because it's the common view, is that there's something at the beginning which is all good and all beautiful and the truth, and that this is what some. So what's this 13.8 billion years of evolution been about then? I mean, it feels like you have a choice then. You either ignore this immense body of scientific knowledge and you just go, "Oh, that's not true. I just believe what's in my book," or whatever the thing you're into is. But if you take it on, then it's a real problem, I think, now to go, well, why did this thing, which is all beauty and all truth, why did we have billions and billions of years of things which, well, have plenty of things that aren't very beautiful in, for instance, why have we got all the ugliness of nature as well as the beauty of nature? Why, what's that? There's the big questions. Whereas if you go, no, these things, all of these things are referring to things within the human realm primarily, that not that beauty's just human, but our appreciation of it in this way is, you can see it evolving in the animal world through attraction to color and smell, and then we have it and it goes on to another level, onto the level of the psyche, and it's evolutionary. It just keeps evolving and getting more sophisticated than it was, just like our understanding of the universe, without a shadow of a doubt, is more sophisticated than it was. The proof is there. So our sense of what is beautiful and how and aesthetics has evolved like mad, and our morality too. I think we are. This is better. The way we behave in the modern world is better. I'd like to see it get better still, by a long way, and that makes much more sense. And then with the idea of God is to go, okay, so if it's going from the simplest and most basic towards the most emergent, the most complex, the richest, then the thing, if we are experiencing something greater than ourselves, which I think we are, then we should understand that as evolutionary, like the leading edge of evolution. And what I've been playing with and what we discussed is how we can understand the experience that gets called God, not as the source, but as you said, the flowering of the universe, that as the leading edge of this whole 13.8 billion years. And suddenly all those problems that you have with the other way around, they disappear. And you can bring the experience of God together with all of the knowledge of science. And that feels to me where we need to go.
It's very mind-blowing. I've been sitting with that one for a while, and definitely excites me in a lot of ways. And what yours seem to be saying when we talk about, let's say, this quality that you've described as like a universal sort of benevolence, and you've kind of tied that to like when we experience ourselves, as you call, as unividual. So when we experience ourselves as both separate and one at the same time, or as, these differentiated individuals who also feel one with the universe and each other, that opens up this universal benevolence, or that deeper, more profound feeling of love for people you might typically not be so fond of, and all of those qualities that are put at the ground, that this experience that you're trying to lead people towards is one where you touch into those same qualities, but you're just interpreting it as that's emergent, that arises with us rather than having been there before, right?
Yes. And what that does, as you gestured towards right at the beginning, is it goes, the individual is the means for this to happen, not an impediment for it to happen. And that makes an awful lot more sense of our individuality, of why it's taken so long for us to evolve that individuality. And I think there is something, what I've noticed around non-dual circles, and people have such different ideas of what non-duality is, so it's a very big spectrum, is that those ones that really seek to deny the individual can become quite cold. And that's certainly what I came across when I was with Ramesh Balsekar, say, when I was in my 30s. And it's the lack of the individual. It's the relational, keeping the relational aspect, so that that's what the unividual is to me. It's the individual, which is in relationship with the whole, realizing that it is arising from the whole, because everything is, so you're connected to it. But your individuality, then your relationship with it is now so intimate, because it's all one, and you're experiencing that oneness as an individual. And I think that brings you into a higher communion with well, everything actually, but certainly with other psyches, other souls who are touching that oneness. And that's where the love and it's just overwhelming. The feeling of that, what I call benevolence, the wishing well to everything and everyone. And it's not remotely cold. And for me on my journey, it's always been that I'm looking for. I'm not really interested in the cold oneness at all.
Right.
It's that warm, connected, loving oneness, communion.
Yeah.
That's why I call it communion, because it's with communion. I have to say, just for those that are pedantic, that's not actually the etymology. That was made up by Augustine. But it's good anyway. With union captures that sense of you, that you're an individual, but you're with communing.
Yeah.
You're in union
Right.
with everything. And that what issues from that is this beautiful feeling of connection and
Yeah.
beauty and love and all those things we've just talked about.
And that radically different and very, I found, healing experience to the radical self-negating non-duality that just by its nature cancels out human relationship. And that going from, I will always repeat it because you said oneness with a hole in it,
Yeah.
where you should be, and getting to experience being in relationship to what I'm also one with.
Yes.
That was such a radically different thing where you could then open it up to celebrating the individual. And
Totally right. And isn't it, I mean, that's what it feels to me. It feels like that what arises from this way of seeing the same fundamentally pretty damn similar experience. Is that where you end up is not this sense of, oh yeah, I don't exist, which can be liberating and interesting. But what you get with this view is that, but not that I don't exist, but you get that liberation sense, that sense of being in a new space. But the self is just endorsed. It's not just like accepted. It's like, well, it's there.
yeah,
It's like, woohoo. And not just yours, but everyone's. It's like you just
yeah,
want to go, yeah, I see you. You're unique, far out. Isn't that beautiful? Let's, between us, really push ourselves to evolve into these more emergent individual states, and then not just disappear off into the nothingness, but
right,
bring the love into the world. And
right.
suddenly your human life, where you asked a question, what was it called, my pod book, and I never said.
Ah,
And so this is on cue. It's called Why Your Life Really Matters, because that's the key thing. It's like your life matters. Your life, your individual life, I think is hugely significant. And we can understand that in a way that incorporates which sees the huge importance actually of these states of spiritual awakening. We can
yeah,
see them in this new way.
yeah. And that's meant so much to me and a lot of people, um, to be able to revive and reclaim the self, but not also necessarily lose, let's say, experiences of oneness and awe. So I also love the
Not
way
at
that
all.
it feels like what you've been creating in a lot of ways leaves the worst and takes the best
Yeah.
of a lot of these initially self-negating traditions so that you can come to experience oneness in a new way where we get to experience it together as real people. And that does give you that sense of our significance and our preciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this could lead into two of the other questions, and I'm not sure which one I want to go with. I think we will do. Okay. Oof, they're so good. Okay. Now, so you've been saying, that there's no ultimate truth and there's all these different ways of interpreting. So does that mean that you are a relativist? There's also this term pluralism. So maybe you want to unpack those because a lot of what you're saying often makes it sound like, well, it's all just different ways of interpreting. They're all valid. They're all equally right. But I know that's not what you're saying. So maybe you want to talk about, in your perspective, there's no ultimate truth, but then how do you evaluate these different truths? Because you are still saying that you think some are better than others. So if you want to go into that relativism.
Yes. No, I think relativism is a huge mistake. I think the great insight that arose from what gets called postmodernity, that movement in our understanding, was the recognition that every worldview is a worldview, and that you can't not have one. If you want to understand anything, you have to use ideas. And so everyone's using ideas. So that's true. You get that. And I think that allows you to have great respect. And then it allows you to step into what could be called pluralism, where you can see, oh, here's a way, here's another way, here's another way. But that is a means or a precursor to integrating it into something coherent. Because if it's not coherent, there's a mistake somewhere, and it will ultimately be untrustworthy. So you can get away with being a scientist during the week at work and then being a fundamentalist Christian at the weekend to a degree, and the fact they don't fit together at all and all of that. People do that. But what we're looking for is an integration whereby you can hold, well, for me, the deepest understanding of the spiritual experience with the deepest understanding we've got of the scientific world, physics, biology, everything, society, everything. Now, you can't always find that. If I think of in physics at the moment, there's two hugely important theories. One would be relativity, one would be quantum physics. They both work, and they don't fit together. So you can't always step straight to a solution, but people are doing their best to go, okay, well, which one's wrong, or are they both wrong? And is there another way of understanding it? And I would absolutely support them not just going, well, we got two ways, who cares? They work. It's like, no, we want to know how, if it doesn't fit together, there is ultimately a contradiction. And if there's a contradiction, your whole ideational network is weak. And you may get away with it, but you may not. And when you can't get away with it is where it's untrustworthy. And the more trustworthy our understanding, the better our lives will be, individually and collectively. So I think relativism is wrong. I think pluralism is okay as a technique to move you forward, to be able to consider many things, but ultimately you're looking to integrate what is trustworthy in all of these different systems. And what I've tried to do with spirituality, which has been my focus all my life, is to go, okay, I've studied all these different traditions. There's something really important in all of them. How can I honor the thing which is important in them and important in my own experience as well? And integrate it with all of these other understandings, which also allowed me to have the internet and fly in a big metal box from country to country and things that really work on other levels.
Yep.
That's it.
So I thank you for sharing all that. What I've loved so much about letting go of this whole ultimate truth thing is that it, for me, opens up a new criteria for why I should entertain another worldview, or why should I want to, experience with that worldview. So instead of it being, okay, the only path that will align me with the truth is to eradicate my sense of self. Maybe I don't really want to do that, but of course I want to live in light of the truth. So I'm going to do that anyway. So now it's kind of, okay, well, I'm not seeking to experience reality in a way that reflects some unquestionable absolute truth, but I can now evaluate it for the values that it leads to, for the qualities it leads to the way that it affects society. So, certainly we could both say that, okay, self-negating non-duality is a valid way of perceiving, don't think it's real. And then there's, let's say, individualism. And then I would ask, well, if the majority of modern society gets led by self-negating non-dual worldview, I don't like the vision that that brings for the next generation on a wide scale. And I much prefer the qualities and the ways that it affects us societally and humanistically to operate with that as my worldview. And of course, not all of it. I don't agree with everything, but to take in at least that sense that we're one, but we're also individuals at the same time. So
Yeah, and I mean, we probably don't need to go into it again, but I would refer people back to our previous conversation because I'm not sure that a lot of the people that I come across who are into the self-negating non-duality know what they mean by the word self. I'm not sure they know what they're negating
consensus
because
usually.
they're talking to me and they're clearly an individual talking to me. And so it's not that. They're a body, so it's not that. So it's what? It's some idea in their head that there's something other than what do they mean? What is this self that's being denied? And I think there's a lot of confusion because people aren't thinking it through. They aren't pushing it hard enough. And that's why it becomes a dogma and doctrinaire. And you get these things just repeated, but unreflectively. And that's, I think, part of what motivated this conversation for us to have, is just to come in and that, do you sure that makes sense?
Mhm.
And so people are being told, oh, you've got a mistaken idea that you exist. And I want to come in and go, no, you might have a mistaken idea, but I don't think it's that one. I think that's pretty certain. I, I think the mistaken idea might be the view of spirituality that you think is absolutely true and somehow given, and it isn't.
Right, right. And what was I going to say? Yeah, and for me, I mean, my perspective has come to see that a lot of these cases, and this was my experience too, was that there's a radical disidentification with everything that is the self. So it's because your misconception in our view is that you're not this psychobiological system. You're really this witnessing presence, or you're, whatever it is, that you're
Yeah,
pure consciousness, that there's a misunderstanding that what has happened is the negation of self versus a disidentification with it, and in some ways a disassociation from.
yeah,
uh, so that's helpful to say. Okay, I'm keeping
absolutely
an
right.
eye on the time here. And okay, so we have almost done, actually.
I want to just add something to that, just as a little taster.
Sure.
Again, and if people want to put something in the comments about this, please do. But I just want to say that you'd suggested a little while back that we might run an event, and could take people to this deep awakening in a individual way. And I
Mhm,
would, and partly that would be obviously very good for people who've been damaged by, or felt psychologically damaged by non-duality, and wanted to see a different route
mhm.
to that same wonderfulness of the experience without the dark side. But also for people who, just wanted to come along and go, oh, what would it be like to see it in a slightly different way and have that same experience that has been so important to them of awakening, of seeing more, but in this connected way.
Yeah,
And I think people would, well, I know, because I've done it all around the world, they will absolutely love it, because it's such a feeling experience, as well as that more
yeah,
universal oneness experience.
yeah.
So if people are interested, they should just put something in the notes, because
I'm gonna come.
it would be really great to get people together. So normally, as you know, people who come are a very wide spectrum, but to get to people who particularly were looking at this non-dual thing,
Mhm.
together, they'd have so much in common. It would be a very interesting way to spend the weekend, and I
Yeah,
think people would come away from it very enriched by it.
definitely. And I hope to play a role in bringing that to fruition at some
Yeah,
point,
may it
sooner
be
rather
so.
than later. Let it be so. Um, yeah, that's a very good point, and you sort of started pointing towards something that I think is important to say too, that a lot of people who are maybe coming out of this self-negating non-duality don't really want anything to do with, let's say, mysticism or even
Yeah,
one per se.
yeah,
But the other things that people can get from individualism is, for example, this flip from a reductionist view to an emergent view, where the self is a real level of reality that's irreducible to this ground. And in some ways, to just start to rebuild a solid sense of self and being able to let go of this ultimate truth that I've seen. And so there's so many things that people can get out of it, even if it's just, a psychological conceptual worldview that helps rebuild a sense of self. So that's why I say, like, there's really, I think, something for everyone there, that they don't have to take on everything.
oh
Um,
goodness, no.
yeah. So that's
I mean, it's what you say. It's like you want the best without the worst. It's simple as that. With everything in life, that's what we're looking for, and with this as well. And you see people, if people, it's not just in non-duality. If people get damaged by their spiritual experience, they think their guru is perfect, and it turns out to be a child molester or whatever it is. You can see that cynicism, understandably, just like, oh well, that I've been there. That's it. And so I really want to be able to come into that conversation and go, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That was not of value. You're absolutely right. But there's something good in there. And I think you tasted it, where you can follow the taste of the good thing without all of the spiritual
right.
nonsense that
Right.
surrounds it. And
Right.
you'll be so glad you did. And I only say that because I've done that. I've been disappointed by spirituality. I have made loads of mistakes. And yet, because I've kind of haven't lost the thread, here I am as I'm getting older going, I'm so pleased, because I think we need it. to survive in this bittersweet journey. We need it.
Yeah. Maybe we can call it Rescuing the Baby from the Bathwater.
Yeah.
Or that could be the subtitle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. So would you rather go with, um, is unividualism is it monism or monism?
Take your pick. Either or either.
I like monism, but then the other question is, how is this similar or dissimilar to Tantric Shaivism? I know that that's been kind of like an emerging shift. A lot of people seem to be shifting from, okay, not self-negating non-duality, but this Kashmir Tantric Shaivism that somehow
Yep.
seems to affirm reality a bit more. And
We
I
can
thought
do
it's
both of those at once.
okay, cool.
He says, let's see if I can. So monism is the idea that everything is one. And I think the person who asked this question said, I talk about the one in relationship to itself. And I did that in our conversation. The problem with that is if you hear it through the old lens, I need to be aware of this because I can mislead people. I'm not going, there's a thing called the one, and it's in relationship to itself. So like the one is being Jessica, and then the one is being Tim, and they seem to be talking to each other, but really it's the one. It's like there's a big puppet master with his hand up your bum and he's making you do things. Not that. When I say the one, it has no qualities at all. It's just there's a oneness of being which is arising as everything, like a field full of information. And it's not God, it's nothing. And it's arising as everything, as it differentiates. So the oneness, it's just recognizing that whilst you and I are different people in different countries and all that, despite all of that, there's also a fundamental oneness of being, which is arising as everything. And recognizing that is one of the big shifts in spiritual awakening. So is that monism? Well, yes and no. It's going, there's a one, but it only is anything because it's in relationship. It's because it's two, and not only two, but 10,000 things, as they say in the Tao Te Ching, everything. So what I'm not saying is that there's a one substance. That's often what monism means. There's a one substance. It's consciousness, whatever the hell that could possibly mean. And everything is made of this one substance. I mean, materialism is a monism. Everything is made of matter. I'm not saying that. But I am saying there's a fundamental oneness which is in relationship with everything as every system, including human beings.
Right.
So that's
And
different.
you've articulated that shift that seems simple, but it's actually huge, where it's not the one or the universe experiencing itself through individuals, but as them, like really as them. That made a big difference to me. And surely part of why your view is not monism is the emergence, because I don't know, in my mind, monism, so I associate it with reductionism, because everything really is just that one substance and it's appearing to be all these other things, but you're seeing things as, these are real emergent properties of reality that can't be reduced to that one underlying substance.
Really well put. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need to add anything to that. That's exactly right. Yeah. There's not, it's not, yeah, I don't need to, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then with the Tantric Shaivism, it's like, it's not, I've never written on it. I haven't studied it in great depth. So, and I know it's become popular over the last 10, 15 years or so. I've come across that. And I think it's become popular because it has a view actually pretty similar, it looks like, to views that I used to have. So not all non-duality, even if that's the right word, is anti the individual.
Right.
And mine wasn't. I have never written a book which was anti the individual. Mine was much more both and all the way through. But it still had this sense that your individuality is an appearance. It's not what you are. What you are is this big consciousness. And so it acknowledges both, and it doesn't dismiss the self, but the individual is a lesser thing. There's the whole idea of the absolute and the relative, all that stuff. And what I see in this tradition is something similar. That first of all, it starts with something which is Shiva, God, consciousness, a mind, something. Even all these things are interpreted in different ways. I don't start with any of that. That's the big shift. No. There's nothing outside. What I'm exploring is there's one process. It is genuinely one. There's one process of emergence, of evolutionary emergence, and everything that has any form whatsoever. And let's say any qualities, because people would say, well, the consciousness has no form. It's just pure. It's like, well, what makes it consciousness? What makes it that, not this? It has something which you could go, it's consciousness. You mean something by that, don't you? Or it's God. So it can't be completely empty of qualities or formless in that sense. And often the story is, it was for me, it has intentions. It wants to know itself. It's projecting or manifesting or emanating reality. And then its reality is within it. Now, it's a beautiful vision. I just think it's wrong. Now, and I think that people who are attracted to that is a lot better than the self-negating non-duality. I really think that's for truth. But what I'm saying is not that. That was what I was saying 12 years ago. And in nearly all my books before that.
Okay.
Well, in fact, all of them. And now it feels like, no, the big shift is there's nothing outside. There's nothing at the beginning, no consciousness, no God. All of it is within this one process of emerging. And that solves so many deep philosophical questions, and yet leaves you with the same experiences. It's the same, the importance of the same spiritual experiences.
Would you want to say anything about panentheism? Because I know, at least in philosophical circles, people do talk about, well, this is panentheism, or this is.
So there's pantheism and panentheism. Panentheism is used. It was a term originally used to describe Hegel, I believe, and now gets used to describe Eastern philosophy as well. And that's the idea that there is a God, whatever that word signifies. It's various, of course, but there is a God, and then God is projecting, or the universe is arising from God. So God is both inside, it both is the universe and is more than the universe. And that's different to pantheism, where God is the universe. Now, what I'm saying is that the critique that arose, the atheist critique that arose after the scientific revolution, is right. You can't, that all of those ideas just fail to work. My difference with the atheist critique is that I think actually there is a very real and important experience of some greater mind or greater soul. And that's for real. But I don't think it's at the beginning, and I don't think this is arising within it. I think it's the leading edge, which is why it's so amazing when you touch it. It's like, wow. And that we are coming together in a communion of psyche or soul to form this greater psyche or soul. And that's when we touch that, when we come into these spiritually awake states, we commune in that, we start touching it. That whole idea in the Christian tradition, where two or more are gathered together, you kind of do this. You don't have to be with someone to experience it. You can be out in nature. You can be sitting with your eyes closed. It's like you don't need anything. It's just there. But when you touch it, it's utterly, utterly sublime.
Well, I think that leads into the next question, which gets, I think, a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of how you are viewing this, like a greater mind or greater psyche, or I think you've said like a super soul. I don't know if you still use that.
Yeah.
But they asked, and of course we haven't touched on this either, but the continuation of life after death, which is a huge part of your philosophy. They asked, after death, do we remain individual, or do we merge to become a greater whole? And maybe that's partly asking too about now.
Yeah. The place I've ended up with that question is both. That, well, the individuality is what we bring to the greater whole. And the analogy that really I find fascinating is to go, look, the whole process of evolutionary emergence has seen, at various key moments, systems coming together to form greater wholes. And the most obvious example is me or you. That we are made of trillions and trillions of individual cells, and somehow all of those cells got together and formed a super system, which is so much more than each individual cell. So what I'm suggesting with the formation of God, and that may be the wrong word to use now, is that just in the same way the psyche, the soul, psyche is just another word, means Greek word, means soul, are coming into a super system. In the same, that hasn't been going on forever. It's just, it hasn't been going on probably for more than a couple of thousand years. But it is happening, and that we are forming a super system. So if you wanted something which was less organic, you might go, like the internet. If you take computers and you go, they're amazing. And then one day someone went, let's link them all up. And we had the internet. It's like, wow. And now you've got, an incredibly powerful thing, supercomputer. In the same way, all these cells got together and you've got a superorganism. All these souls got together and you've got a super soul or super psyche. But here's the thing which refers to the individual, which I love, which is the thing which makes my body work as a super system is all the cells are not the same. If they were all the same, I'd be a big pile of cells.
Right.
And it's because they're different that they work together to create something greater than each one of them individually. And I think that's what's happening with us, that we are developing and evolving this individuality, which is what we bring to the greater communion. So the answer to the question is, I think the individual. Now, that doesn't mean that your focus is always on your individuality. So I think it's perfectly possible, because you're conscious of whatever you focus on and the rest will become unconscious, it's perfectly possible that certainly in the after-death situation, when I've come into the light, which has happened a little bit for me, and it's always been really powerful, I'm not particularly paying attention to Tim.
Right.
In fact, the deepest experience is I haven't paid attention to Tim at all. But Tim was having the experience. He was just so focused on the light that just the light. So that's possible. But even then, what I'm bringing to it is everything that makes Tim Tim. So that's where I've ended up with that question.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. And yeah, for me, it makes me think of that you're, like you said, it's something to point to. We talked about it a lot more in the other video, but where you are sort of accounting for the no self situation with a different interpretation, where you can lose sight or lose attention on what makes you feel like an individual self. But that doesn't mean we have to conclude from that the self doesn't exist. So
Absolutely.
that was a helpful shift as well.
It's a big shift, that. I mean, it's really important, I think, if you can get that. Your attention may be on something where you're not conscious of time or self or anything. And that's wonderful. How fantastic. What a great thing to experience and to do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that time has stopped, and it doesn't mean that you've stopped existing.
Or that time doesn't exist.
Or exactly. It just means that you're not paying attention. And anything you don't pay attention to will be as if it doesn't exist.
Right. Especially if you've trained your attention to go into those deep single points of focus. Or
Yeah, and that's a huge part of what meditation is, for instance. And how great is that? But don't, I think the example we probably used in our conversation, because it's so obvious to me, is it's like someone going, oh, no, you don't understand. I experienced last night. I went to bed and I experienced there was no world.
Yeah.
It's like, no, there was a world. You were just dreaming.
Right.
Or you were just asleep. It's like you approach it with a little bit more common sense, and then it all fits in together quite nicely.
I'm with you there. And we have only one last question, and it's a
All
pretty
right.
big one. It's a big one.
Okay, good.
But where does liberation fit into individualism? So he says, or let's say, where does liberation from individuality occur? And for me, this is a really poignant question because, my whole path was about the truth that will set you free, and the liberation via self-negation, and this whole needing to be freed from individuality. So if you want to take it from there, is this a liberation paradigm, Tim?
Not in that way, not at all. I mean, I don't, liberate. Why do you want to be liberated from your individuality? It's, it's the leading edge of 13.8 billion years of evolution. What do you want to be liberated from? It's like And well, I understand why people might, because it's like being an individual is hard as well. It's bittersweet. But no, I don't. So that whole moksha thing is based on that version of liberation is based on the idea that you're in some sort of trap.
Can you say what moksha is for anyone who might
It's liberation. It means liberation. So it's like you're caught in Maya or samsara. You're caught in these are all Eastern ideas. You're caught in, but also, Plato has it, and it's a common thing that arose at a certain, most of these ideas have arisen at certain stages in the evolution of culture.
Right.
And at the time, they're the leading edge. And then we move on, and we understand it more. The bleeding edge was once thunder is a man with a big hammer in the sky. That was the leading edge. And fair enough. When you've got very few ideas, that's a good idea. And I understand why people can go, oh, this is like kind of a dream, or you've got stuck in matter, which is gross, and really all this non-material psyche or soul, because that's how you experience yourself. All of that makes sense. And then you're freed from something which is hard, your biology, suffering, and history is full of suffering. So to get free of that, incredible, to get free of your body. I understand why it arisen. What we've done in the modern world is we've gone, let's pay biology some attention and see if we can make it less suffering. And we have. So
Right.
it's no longer as much suffering. So there's nothing to get free from. There's no trap. Instead, you've got this evolution from suffering to less suffering. You've got, or poverty to less poverty, or ignorance to less ignorance. And so there's nothing to get free from. But that same feeling of I'm free arises because you become free from your old limiting understanding, and the awakening always feels like this to me. I'm looking at it in this way, and then, oh,
Right.
wow. And certainly when you touch that higher super soul, God, whatever damn name works for you, that sublime presence, and you're, oh, wow. Then I would, if you want to say you'll feel liberated, I would go, yeah, absolutely. Free, baby. It's just great. I'm free from all that heavy that I get when I'm like this. So the emotional content of liberation stays the same, but not the sense that you've got to be liberated from yourself. And rather, you just keep evolving yourself. But when you've done this, yourself is on a whole new level. And then as you merge, as you commune with the sublime presence, your individuality becomes a unividuality. And then you're on a whole nother level again. And my hypothesis is that that's what's happening to us collectively. That, not tomorrow, or not to everyone, of course, but that there will be another jump, and that many, many more people are being invited into that, feel themselves coming into that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. And we talked about it more in I think the first part of the last video was this whole kind of expanding your perception so that you're part of a greater context. You're not a greater context devoid of you. You're you now seen and experienced within something greater. So for me, it's gone from the freedom from to more of a freedom to, the freedom to be an individual that can experience unity, but that is willing to suffer for some of the most precious experiences that you can have. So I think that's such an important shift in terms of even just what the path values, not valuing this escape or the cynical kind of perspective that you have to get away from yourself, but while still understanding why that's attractive to a lot of us when we're suffering, especially.
Beautifully put. And it's like I have this idea which is too big to go into, and I think we probably will have talked about it at some point. That we are our past, really. We're a process. So, and that's a mixed blessing, because there's lots of things that about Tim which could do with evolving, and I have to live with that, and I have to do my best to evolve that. But if I can sense this great goodness that I can keep reaching for, it gives me the inspiration to do that. And then that's a large part of why my life's meaningful, because I get to do that. I get to support you doing it. And the other people I love, and they support me, and between us, we're moving it on for
Yeah.
ourselves, but also for future generations,
Yeah.
and that's really makes the journey meaningful, and it ceases to be this prison you're stuck in, and it becomes this thing that you're part of it growing.
I like that a lot. That opens up, when people lose their sense of engagement and participation in the world when they go down these self-negating paths. It's one of the hardest things is how can I feel called to participate or engage in reality again? So I love that this is more about like, okay, you can still expand your perception, be part of something greater and not just a limited, body mind system, whatever. That then it can be about how do I want to now engage with reality in a way that I can bring something positive to the world and to humanity and our individual relationships from a wider perspective. And so there can be that real kind of redemption of the drive and the will and the just feeling called to be a part of this and be a part of the human family and hopefully make it better in some way.
Beautiful.
So that's, one of the best things I love about individualism and some of the things that people can get from it because it's so profoundly humanistic and participatory and yeah. We did all the questions.
And I think you've just nailed it. So
And there.
that's a beautiful statement to
You wanna say anything else about anything upcoming, anything else about the pod book, any last minute statements?
No, I think we've covered it all. I just I'm grateful to you for
See
initiating this, and I'm really grateful to anyone who helps me refine these ideas and share these ideas, and anything to allow them to do any good they can, and to open up another possibility for us on this incredible journey we're on.
do you wanna maybe say something about the ICU where people
Yeah,
can
yeah, that's a great idea. See, that's brilliant. See, I would have just forgotten that. But yes, of course. This is great because we're able to address questions that have been sent to us. If you want to meet up with us, and address questions to me, um, I have a tiny little online community which has made of some really special people where we gather every week on a Sunday evening UK time, and it's literally all over the world. People get up in the middle of the morning in early in Australia and America and all over, Japan, and all sorts. And um, we come together to really experience this shift
Mm.
and support each other and to engage. I get to share my latest ideas because I'm working on new ideas all the time, and have them pushed and see if they stand up. And then also we can engage with some your individual questions. And if you'd like to do that, you can join with the link to Patreon, and it'd be lovely to see you.
highly recommend it. Alright. Well, Tim, I think we did well, and I look forward to our future endeavors.
Me too.
Okay. Do you wanna how do you stop this?